could have done what Wind Waker HD did years before and cut the encore performances out after the first play. Wind Waker HD also made great use of the D-pad when sailing, putting commonly used items on it to free up the mappable buttons. The sky is even more barren than Wind Waker's sea, with only a few islands worth visiting. Normally when a Zelda game releases, the reputation of the previous game improves. It's called the Zelda cycle. A lot of people criticized Wind Waker's visuals at release, but after the snooze fest that was Twilight Princess, people came to appreciate just how much style and character the game had. Ganon has been presented differently in each game. In Ocarina of Time, he was a manipulator who cheated his way to world domination, while in Wind Waker he was humbled to the point of being sympathetic. They originally wanted to replace the tracks from scratch with modern samples, which is what Wind Waker HD did. It would have been better to have the items displayed by default for real-time selection, which is how Wind Waker HD handled things. As the games got bigger, the worlds got emptier, with as much as 40% of its content being cut. The game has a lot in common with Wind Waker in that regard, and much like that game, you can kind of sense where something is missing. And again, like Wind Waker, the game has a pretty gnarly fetch quest that sends you all over the world and back half a dozen times, with each return trip requiring a trek up the same mountain. It is again like Wind Waker, a very flawed game that ends up being a lot of people's favorite anyway by virtue of how appealing it is. Again, like Wind Waker, the remake leaves the biggest problems untouched and puts a band-aid on a few smaller issues. This was a common use of the pad for a lot of games, and while it was definitely convenient, it's still fairly easy to just pause the game to do these things. If touch inventory comes at the cost of hardware so underpowered that it slows to a crawl every time I fire a cannon, I'd probably rather just pause the game. Wind Waker HD was more rushed and upscaled the textures instead of drawing new ones, but it still managed to look and sound more modern with a new lighting system and soundtrack, and the few gameplay changes it made packed a lot of punch. That one went up to $50. They developed a version with more advanced visuals when testing styles for Breath of the Wild, which is also where Wind Waker HD came from, and it's disappointing that this release didn't implement any of that.